So the recording is started. Welcome, George. I would like to introduce Mr. George Strodbeck III, the main author of this book, the copy I have, concerning Lean Six Sigma implementation at Cummins. Welcome, George.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
The purpose of this video is educational, to encourage people, including students, to read this book because this is pretty unique, and I will tell why later on. But I know already that this is not only the book you have written, right?
That's correct. I've written two. The other one is a book on change. It is making change in complex organizations. And it's the precursor to the more detailed version of Six Sigma, which talks about how that change occurred.
Okay, thanks for this presentation. And the first question then, you have created a kind of customized management model to implement Lean Six Sigma at Cummins. And this model uses well-known technique from a project management toolbox, I mean S-curves. Why you have applied customized management model and why you needed this disciplined approach?
I've participated in a lot of change efforts over a 40-plus year career, either both in the civilian world and in the U.S. Army, and now as a consultant. And I've observed that many change efforts die at a point. They reach a certain point and then they don't make any more progress. And a lot of that's because organizations aren't really clear on what the change means for them. What are we trying to really achieve? And then they think it's enough just to train people and expect then that they're going to change their behavior and the organization is going to change. And that's not the way change occurs in an organization. It's a maturing process. And so I started thinking about using S-curves because the S-curve is a way to think about maturity over time. But I started thinking in terms of a series of S-curves because the first S-curve is just the left-hand side of a bell-shaped curve. And if you stop at the top of the first S-curve, the change effort will begin to decay and die. So you've got to create a living system. And so we did that by developing different mechanisms or different kinds of projects that we could use Six Sigma processes and tools with, thinking that DMAIC is just a logic trail that you use for Six Sigma, and then you have this whole bunch of tools, and those tools are useful depending on the kind of project that you have. So we would introduce new kinds of projects to the leadership team to help them see that Six Sigma was way more than manufacturing processes. And Six Sigma typically gets started in manufacturing because that's where all the data is. But if you stop there, management begins to lose interest because they think that's all there is to it, and then they move on to the next thing. So I wanted to have some kind of way to demonstrate that this was a living system that would grow and change over time and address ever increasingly important projects and problems and improvements that needed to be made in the business. And that's how the S-curve came about.
Okay. Very interesting approach. In this book, you have included many interviews, starting from the CEO level to the belt level, which is pretty unique. I think it creates a kind of insider's view. Normally, such readings provide the CEO thinking and the kind of general bridge to financial results. And I think thanks to these interviews, indeed, this book is very credible. But this is my point of view. Please tell us what motivated you to do that.
I had really two objectives in writing the book. I wanted to document for history the amazing efforts of all the people in the company to make Six Sigma come to life. we did over 45,000 projects during the 15 years that are documented in the book, and we did them in literally every process and system that the company had, and it took literally thousands of people's efforts for that to come about, and I wanted to make sure that that wasn't lost and was recorded somewhere so you could read about it and see what actually happened. The second goal really was to make sure if somebody was interested in doing Six Sigma, an organization was interested in maybe pursuing Six Sigma, anybody in the company could find somebody just like them. And instead of taking vignettes or small quotes out of interviews that we did, I thought making interviews into whole chapters would allow for a richness of the story for different levels of the organization, for different people at different levels of the organization to read about somebody just like them. So whether you were a CEO, there's 2 CEO interviews, or a senior manager of an organization, or somebody who's just going to be a green belt, you could read what the impact was of Six Sigma on their work, why they decided this was important for them to do. So the story becomes more about the decisions necessary and the actions necessary to make this really work, and then the impact that it has on people individually over time. And I thought those were the 2 most important goals for writing this down.
Okay, thanks. I think already 40 years have passed since the first implementation of Six Sigma at Motorola. But in my opinion, we have still pretty few books which I call benchmarks to learn about Six Sigma implementations. I saw the latest one probably concerns Starbucks company, which was published almost 3 years ago, and Lean Design for Six Sigma at Ford, but pretty few. What is the reason, in your opinion? Everybody knows Toyota production system, of course. Is it a matter of good marketing, or it is just a very good company, even great? Or it is a culture dependent, because if you want to share your experience, you have to show also your weaknesses, which can be embarrassing. What do you think?
I think the first thing is that about Toyota, I think the Toyota story is true. I've studied it a bit. And one of the most important things that comes out of the Toyota story for me is that it was a 50-year journey. It took them 50 years from the end of World War II on into the 70s and 80s to develop a system that we now call the Toyota production system, which is fundamentally built on a key concept, which is we want to see our problems. We want to find our problems. We want to see what those problems are, and we want to fix them, because fixing problems and making improvements has a big impact on customers. But it was a 50-year journey, half a century of hard work to put that culture in place. The reason most companies can't tell their own Six Sigma story, even if they've been doing it for a really long time, is very few people stay in place long enough to see the whole story. There's most of the books out there are about deployment. How do you get started? What kind of projects do you do? How do you use the statistics to understand variation in processes? And those are fine for getting started, but there's not many people who stayed with the development and the deployment of the system for 10 to 15 years. I stayed with it for 15 years. And I say that not because it's about me, but I know the whole journey, because I was part of the whole journey and was documenting that as we went along. So I was able to write it down. The struggle is that most of the books tend to be written by technical people. And technical people like the math. They like the statistics. They like the charts. They like all that. That's what they're really good at, and that's what they really enjoy. To take it out of the realm of statistics into the realm of continuous improvement across the whole company, you have to be with it long enough to see how those applications work. We used to call it small experiments. Before we'd try certain kind of project in a big way, we'd do a couple of projects first to see if it worked, and then we'd review those projects, and then we'd start to publicize those projects both with senior management and then across the leadership teams across in the businesses, so that we could see how different projects could benefit the organization. So projects like working with suppliers and projects with customers and projects in the community, as well as many other risk projects and many other different kinds of projects, were all things that had to develop over time. We had to have confidence that they would work before we could use them in a different place. And if you didn't, if a person wasn't with all those changes as time went along, you don't have the whole context. You don't have the linkage in how everything worked, which is also what the value of the S-curves is. The S-curves allow you to continue to grow your deployment and continue to grow the categories of projects that you can do and link them all together. And so it starts to become a giant system of interactions. And it's hard to see if you're not in the middle of it for a long period of time. And I think that's one of the major reasons why you don't see many company books out there that describe all that. And in fact, if you read Jeff Liker's book about the Toyota way, he's talking to people that have been in the system for years and years and years, and documenting how that came about inside Toyota. And that's kind of the genesis of the Six Sigma book that I wrote.
Thanks, George. Absolutely true. Going back to the history of Cummins, Cummins had several predecessing programs, including Cummins production system, which was really the latest one before Six Sigma has been implemented. Let me cite here former VP of Quality, Mr. Frank McDonald, who pointed out that some of the CPS ideas helped to implementing Six Sigma, especially these that enabled acceptance of the CPS. I especially like this word acceptance, because I'm interested in scientifically interested in acceptance process. So what is your opinion? What were the enablers Frank was referring to?
There were a couple. The first one, and the one that's most important in any change effort, is what leadership does. So the leadership of the organization has to be engaged. And by engagement, I mean to be actively involved through the course of the change effort. If leadership isn't involved through the entire course, people think that we've moved on to something else. And so the leader has something called management capital to spend. And management capital is made up of three things: a person's time, the budgets of the organization, and personal enthusiasm. And that's what people look at to identify the things that are most important to the company, because those are the things, those are the areas of the company where resources are going to be allocated in terms of time, money, and people. So the leadership role is to demonstrate how important this is to the business by spending management capital on the things that they think are most critical. And when it came to CPS, there were one of the main leaders of CPS was Joe Lokery, who's also interviewed in the Six Sigma book. And Joe was the head of operations, all manufacturing in the engine business at that time. And he personally engaged at a very, very detailed level on making sure that people understood what CPS was and why it was important and what he was doing to make sure that it moved along. So what goes with that then is training. What do you want people to do? And it's more than 3-ring binders. It's training them on what you expect, and then developing measures that are going to indicate whether or not what you want them to do is working, and then connect those results to real business results. So in terms of money, what is it doing for us from a financial point of view? And CPS came about because we were struggling, the company was struggling in manufacturing in the 80s, and we had some product issues and those kind of things. And we started looking at the manufacturing processes and benchmarking other companies like Toyota. And CPS came out of those benchmarking efforts and the need to change and become more controlled in the way that we produced our products and services. And And Joe Lokri was a main driver of that. Frank McDonald was one of the key people in that. He went around the world training people on what this meant and what we were going to do. But it started with leadership. It then had training that tells people what we want them to do. We measure whether or not that's having an effect, and then we translate that into real dollars. We use those 4 areas as key drivers for how to put Six Sigma into the organization, how to deploy it effectively. And the result was those 45,000 projects I mentioned before, and over $5 billion in savings that went almost directly to the bottom line. And if you go back and look at the history of Cummins' financial performance during that time, it was remarkable what we were able to accomplish. And it all showed up in stock value and revenue and profit. And it was just a really tremendous thing that the company was able to do.
Very interesting view. Thank you, George. And last but not least, a question concerning probably implementation tactics. You mentioned in your book that Six Sigma was implemented, of course, in manufacturing, but also in design engineering. So from tactical perspective, we can introduce Six Sigma in parallel in different departments. And there is also a known rule which tells us that we should be focused first on operations. By operations, I mean all functions which are focused to deliver products or services. So what is your opinion? What rule should be applied? Shall we really start from operations first, or it depends?
I think each company has to make up their own minds about that. We decided to go broadly across all the functions of the business. And the reason we decided that was our goal was never to become a great Six Sigma company. We didn't want to become great at doing Six Sigma work. Our goal was continuous improvement toward perfection for our customers, and use Six Sigma as a way to drive that continuous improvement toward perfection. Well, the customer is impacted by all kinds of things. They're impacted by the way we bill them. They're impacted by the way we service. They're impacted by the marketing material that we have and the service brochures and literature. And it's not just the hard good product. It's many, many, many things. And those different things are owned by different parts of the company, by different functions in the company. So right from the beginning, we knew we wanted all functions of the business to be engaged in this, and ultimately all functions of the business were, to include the legal functions. So our lawyers were doing projects, our risk management people, our community people, everybody in the organization had a role to play in making Six Sigma work. And so in that first launch in January of 2000, we had representation from all of the major functions in the business in many parts of the world as a way to get started. And in fact, our very first really big project wasn't a manufacturing project, it was a finance project. And that project saved us several $1 million that dropped directly to the bottom line. And you can see those dollars if you can go back and look at the 10Ks from 25 years ago now, how impactful that one single project was to the business. So we learned very early on that this just wasn't a manufacturing thing. And one of the reasons it gets started in operations is because there's a misconception. And that fundamental misconception is that Six Sigma is about statistics and about using statistical tools to understand variation and control it. And it very much is, if you have data. If the kind of process that you're trying to improve is data rich and you use those tools in the data scheme. But all processes are spewing off data, whether it's objective data or subjective data, there's data there. And what Six Sigma is just a logic trail. We want to define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And then you have this huge set of tools that you can use in the process. And it doesn't matter what tool you use. What matters is, what tool do I need to use and how do I use that to make the improvement that I need to make? And I think that was the big lesson for us in Six Sigma, is that we understood fairly quickly that it wasn't about doing great measurement systems analysis or having a great capability study. It was about understanding what your problem was in depth and being able to isolate and minimize variation and waste so that the process was improved, so customers got more of what they paid for, and we had better revenue and profit over time, and those two things traveled together. And it was never about statistics. It was always about improvement. And I think that's the thing that many companies miss when they get started in this.
Thank you very much, George, for the insights. Probably we could speak much longer than speaking only about this couple of questions. Let me put some information about this book under the video so interested people can know necessary details about it, okay?
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Yep. Thanks for your time. Talk to you later.
Thanks. So